Okay, so it looks like we're ready to go. We're all recording and everything. Everyone can hear me, hopefully. Okay, good. Okay. Sakirati, you hearing me? Just to make sure we're on the same page here. Okay, well. Thanks everybody for coming to the second installment of our Glories of Sri Radha series. Just a brief recap of the last week. So last Monday we heard about the supremacy of Sri Radha and her bodily characteristics. We went over her the markings on her lotus feet and talked somewhat about the meanings that those symbols have, and of course all of these things are for meditation, for us to be able to meditate more deeply on her. Any aspect, of course, meditating on the absolute, whether it's the bodily features of Radha, or as today we'll hear the qualities or their associates or their friends, friends and associates, or their leelas, or hearing about their tattva, their love. Like if we were to describe Radha's Mahabhav, the way Sri Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami describes it, then all of that, because we're talking about the absolute, this is all a way to bring the mind more deeply into the subject. So today, of course, we're going to go over from Ujjvala Nilamani the 25 qualities of Radha. Let's say a short Mangala Charan and we'll get started. Om Ajnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vairagya Vidya Nija Bhakti Yoga Shikshartameka Purusha Purana Shri Krishna Chaitanya Sri Radha Kripam Budhiryastamaham Prapadye. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha. Okay, so speaking from Ujjvala Nilamani, which is chapter 4, description of Radha. So now this, as you can see, this is a big book. So this is Rupa Goswami, of course, Rupa Goswami's sequel to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where he describes Ujjvala Rasa, or Shringar Rasa, or Madhurya Rasa, as it's commonly called, in its entirety. Whereas in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he described it in a short way, kind of a shorthand description, or an outline more. And this, of course, Ujjvala Nilamani goes into great detail was actually one of the things we're going to talk about today. Just it struck me just once again how it's something that I've contemplated over the years, where sometimes atheists will, deny the existence of God and whatnot, and just the very fact that the Gaudiyas have so much detail about divinity, from the elements of tattva to the description of their physical, their form, and all the symbols on their hands and feet. It's like there's so much detail. It's like, how could people make this up? I always found that to be a pretty compelling fact, that just the sheer volume of detail about divinity is pretty compelling in itself. It says that the people who are absorbed in this world, they've got something going on, especially considering that these descriptions are consistent across time. Anyway, that's a side point, of course. Or I should say, so today we're speaking about the qualities of Sri Radha. There are 25 qualities that she has, or 25, I should say, that Sri Rupa gives in this verse. But at the end, he basically says, like Krishna's qualities, they can't be counted. And these qualities are grouped or there's different qualities pertaining to different aspects of Radha's being. First 6 are her bodily qualities. The next 3 pertain to her speech. The next, I think it's 6. The next 10, this is coming from Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary. The next 10 qualities are related to her mind, and then the last 6 are qualities in relation to others. So, Atha Vrindavanishvarya Kirtyante Pravaraguna Madhureyam Navavayas Chapala. I probably should wear these for reading Sanskrit, shouldn't I? Chalapango Jwalasmita Charusobhagya Rekardhya Gandhon Madita Madhava Sangita Prasara Bhigya Ramyavan Narma Pandita Vinita Karuna Purna Vidagdha Partavan Vita Lajja Shila Sumaryada Dhairya Gambhirya Shalini Suvilasa Mahabhava Paramotkarsha Tarshini Gokula Prema Vasatir Jagatshrini Lasajyashaha Gurvarpita Guru Sneha Saki Pranayita Vasha Krishna Priyavali Mukhya Santata Shrava Keshava Bahuna Kingunastasya Sankhyatita Hareriva. So as I mentioned, so Rupa Goswami says that Bahuna Kingunastasya Sankhyatita, her qualities like Hari are, they can't be counted, but these are a representative section, just in the same way that Sri Rupa says in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he gives 64 qualities of Sri Krishna, but then he says, but we are talking about God here, so these qualities are actually limitless. But then it's a similar idea to Krishna's description of himself at Arjun's request in the 10th chapter of the Gita, where he says, he gives all these ways of meditating on him that based on excellent things we find in the world, and says, but what's the need for all this? My qualities are uncountable. So in the midst of studying the madhurya, the sweetness of the absolute, we are constantly reminded of the infinitude of the absolute. So last time we heard about the auspicious markings on Radha, and then her decorations, how her body's decorated, and the accoutrements, especially for Shamananda, and her ornaments and whatnot. And so now these qualities, the way Rupa talks about these is, like I said, just it's a representation of some of the things that we could talk about. She is beautiful. She's Madhurya. Possesses new youth, has fickle glances, has a bright smile, Ujjvala Smita. Beautiful lines of fortune, a fragrance that frenzies Krishna, Gandon Madita Madhava. Is skillful at singing, has a pleasant voice, is expert at joking, Narma Pandita. It's one of my favorites. Is humble, compassionate, sly. For those who, I might define some of these for those who are not, English isn't your first language. Sly is like kind of sneaky in a way. And we can, my plan is to go into some of these. So the structure of the book is the same as Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So Sri Rupa will compose a verse of his own, describing an aspect of the deity he's talking about, in this case, of course, Radha. And then each one of these qualities, he will quote a verse from somewhere in the sacred literature, whether it's a Purana or whatnot, to illustrate that quality or that point that he's making. It's a common structure. And sometimes he quotes himself, like he'll quote the Vidagdha Madhava, one of his own plays, but works for me. So she's compassionate, sly, clever, shy, respects proper conduct, is patient, inscrutable, which means that she remains silent, coy, manifests thirst for Krishna with the highest state of Mahabhav, is the abode of Prem and Gokul, has lustrous fame, is the object of great affection from elders, is controlled by affection of her friends, is chief of Krishna's beloveds, and constantly controls Krishna. What more can be said? Her qualities, like Krishna's, cannot be counted. So the nice thing about this book and why this book is so big is because it has the commentaries of Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti in it. And Shri Vishwanath has made a lovely contribution in that, as Sri Rupa will quote a verse, Vishwanath will say who is speaking this verse, which you wouldn't get that from the verse itself. So how he knew this, I don't know, but it's great that he put it in there, because then we can get a sense of what a greater context for the verses that are being spoken. And then again, these are all just things that can be meditated on. Like you can take one of these qualities and then one of the verses that Sri Rupa has quoted and think about the context. It kind of becomes like sort of a mantramaya upasana, where one can meditate upon the verse as a still picture of the Leela. And there, considering that there are 25 qualities, that's a lot of meditation that one can do. So we're in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we're in the ocean of sweetness here. And so it's any point that we choose to meditate on, we're contacting the infinite, which is pretty amazing thought when you really get down to it. So, as I mentioned, the qualities are broken down into different, pertaining to different aspects of Sri Radha. And then Sri Rupa in his next three verses, he says there are 4 types of qualities of Radha's: body, speech, mind, and relationship with others. So he's basically explaining a little bit about the breakdown of how he's written it. Then he goes into, he just starts at the beginning of the list: beauty, from Vidagdha Madhava, And then he quotes a verse, his own verse, to illustrate her beauty. So I didn't want to necessarily go through all 25 qualities this way. That would be pretty time consuming and probably boring for people to sit and listen through. But I wanted to go through some of them that I thought were particularly sweet. Where are we here? Well, here's an example of something that I found interesting. So one of the qualities, of course, is Ujjwala Smita. She has a sweet or a bright smile. And so Sri Rupa says, "Oh friend, spying the thin line of a sweet smile in the pure middle portion of your lips on your moon-like face, the best of Chikora birds," that would be Krishna, "the destroyer of suffering, with wild intelligence because of bliss and pride, is coming here quickly." So her smile attracts Krishna. And in the commentary, or in the verse, I should say, Sri Rupa uses the word agabit. And it's an interesting word because those of you who are familiar with Guru Maharaj's pranam prayers, agabit is used in his prayer and in his pranam. And so agabit is a name for Krishna, the killer of Aga, the destroyer of sin, that is very dear to the cowherd sector. But as we see here, it can also be thought of in terms of those pursuing Madhurya Ras, because so Vishwanath, he gives the context. He says, Krishna saw this slight smile that appeared for an instant on Radha's face. So it came and went, and she tried to hide it. And he began to think, it will spread out to become a kiss. So he's hoping. And so in Vishwanath, he suggests, or he mentions that there's a joke that's suggested that uses the word agabit. So it was an interesting point to me that just regardless of even a person who is pursuing Sakyaras could read this and derive something for their bhajan from it. So and it works both ways too, like in the same way of meditating on Krishna Balaram, even though one could be pursuing Madhurya Ras. Took me quite a while to understand that point, even though it's fairly simple. So the next quality is her auspicious marks. And so the last time we went over the markings on Radha's feet, and I didn't go over her hands because I thought it would just make the class too long. And I'm not going to go into detail on her hands, other than like on her right hand, there are conch shells on each of her 5 fingertips. I mean, and so Shri Jiva goes into all of these, and Vishwanath as well. Suffice it to say that on both feet, there are 19 marks, which we went into last time. And there are, between both hands, there are 35 marks on the hands. So the point being that she's extremely auspicious. She has all these different markings that set her apart from anyone else. And same with Krishna, of course, although I'm not sure that I've read a description of his hands. But this is reading this description of all these different symbols and markings on Radha's hands is one of the things that kind of had me thinking about just the sheer level of detail, like from what she wears, all these different, her ornaments and her accoutrements and her bodily characteristics, and all these markings are just an unbelievable amount of detail. So she's got a total of 50 marks on her body, which is on her hands and feet. That's And then as we went into in some detail last time, each one of those has a meaning, whereas so the meanings of the symbols on her hands are not given here in the commentaries. They're just the locations on her hands are given. So one of my favorite qualities, Gandon Marita Madhava. Gandha is a scent, of course, like Krishna in the Gita says, Punya Gandha Prativyang Cha. I am the original fragrance of the earth. So Gandha means fragrance, and it's Unmarita Madhava. It makes Madhava crazy, driving him crazy. And interesting thing about this, so the verse that Sri Rupa quotes doesn't say where it's from. Vishwanath brings out the point that Tunga Vidya speaks this verse. And she says, "Oh Madhavi," speaking to Radha, "do not uselessly try to hide yourself by the leaves of the creepers. Oh friend, Krishna, the king of the gallants, that rascal, making you shake will certainly enjoy you, who are like a jasmine flower detected by your fragrance. That fragrance betrays you and wanders about to incite him to madness." So this, in the context of speaking about her fragrance that naturally emanates from her body and makes Krishna, is very, very attractive to Krishna. The thought came to me that, so her nature being Vamya, the left hand nature, which we will get into more when I talk about the type of love that Sri Radha personifies. So this Vamya nature, it's oppositional, it's non-submissive. So in distinction to the right-wing gopis of Chandravali's camp who are submissive. So Radha is not submissive, and so she will she tries to hide herself from Krishna. And this of course increases the rasa that Krishna enjoys ultimately. And so, but as she's hiding herself amongst the leaves of the forest, hiding herself in a bush from Krishna, her scent is emanating out, and so Krishna finds her anyway. But that was an interesting, sweet point I thought about her, how she hides herself, the reason she hides herself. There was a verse that I skipped that I wanted to read. So before he gets into the oh no, it's coming up. Excuse me. So I'm just kind of going through the qualities and the ones that I am particularly partial to, or that have more extensive commentary. I'll kind of go into a bit. So Narma Pandita. So it means she's expert at joking. And Sri Rupa gives a couple examples. So she basically says that I've gone and I've bathed, I'm going to worship the sun and I've bathed, so don't touch me. So she's implying that he's impure, and she uses the term Vrishavardhana, destroyer of dharma. So it's one of those examples where she will say one thing but she means another, and this is common throughout the Leelas and whatnot. And so as we know from the Bhagavatam, Parokshavad, this indirect speech, is very attractive to relishers. And so Krishna being Rasaraj, the highest of all relishers, he enjoys this indirect speech, and he enjoys these subtle meanings of and opposite meanings and implied meanings of things. So on the face, Radha says that O person famous for good acts. And yet in Jiva Goswami's commentary, she indicates the opposite. You are famous for sin. So this is an example of her being expert at joking. And so she'll say one thing on its face that has a particular face meaning, a meaning that a surface meaning, but what she really means is the complete opposite, and which is common with Sanskrit, where you can derive the opposite meaning from something just by dividing the words slightly differently or whatever, or even it might even the opposite meaning might even be inherent in the term. So even though she's saying he's famous for dharma, what she means is he's actually sinful. Now, and this is just a way of kind of poking him a bit, which is common. The Krishna does his share of poking as well, where we find in the Leela where, for example, after he and Radha have been in secrecy, and they'll come out of the kunj, and Radha is still disheveled and she's getting dressed and whatnot, and then Krishna will start to, before all of her friends, he will embarrass her before her friends by describing what they just did. So you can imagine for a teenage girl, talking in public about your love affairs is kind of not something it's going to be embarrassing. So Krishna loves to embarrass Radha like that, and so she gets back at him by joking with him in these ways. In fact, Vishwanath Chakravarti he mentions here that unsatisfied because Krishna answered her cleverly, she takes aim at Krishna with this verse. So there's this intellectual jousting that goes on between the two. And this, of course, takes place in all of, you find examples of it in Sakya Ras, and it's very prominent, of course, in Madhurya Ras. Probably not so much in Vatsalya. And her humility, which is a really sweet one. So I mean, it's interesting that you've got someone who's an all-powerful being and yet humble. And that just goes to illustrate her, even though she is what she is, she's doesn't have any pride about being the best. She's actually just the opposite. In fact, from Vidagdha Madhava, we hear Sri Rupa quotes his own play again and again. This is Radha thinking to herself, again and again I've offended Krishna by playful quarrels. She's referring to her man. Praiseworthy, he is still willing to accept me. Oh, slender-waisted girl, what reason is there for taking me back other than the fragrant blossom of the great quality of mercy of you, my friends? So even though she's the only one who can satisfy Krishna, she still thinks that she offends him by her behavior, and that he is to be praised, even though he's praiseworthy, and that he's still willing to accept me, when in actuality it's just the opposite. He's the one that's going and enjoying with Chandravali and leaving her in the kunj waiting for him, tapping her fingers or tapping her foot and leaving her in anxiety, wondering when he's going to come or if he's going to come. And then when he does come, he's got the signs of love on his body. And so she's just, so many times she's like, I should say, she's advised by Lalita and her friends to, don't let that cheater in here, because you deserve better, basically, is what they're trying to say. And he's been with other people, he's been with other girls. What is this? And yet she doesn't think like that. She thinks, even though he is like that, she thinks, well, why should he take me back? So this is obviously a very powerful example of her humility. And then she's also, she's Karuna Purna. She's fully compassionate, greatly compassionate. And the example here is interesting. Seeing a calf whose mouth was pierced by a piece of straw, compassionate Radha began to weep. Filled with grief, she applied kumkum to the wound. So that's, I have some friends who are like that, that they're so soft-hearted that they see an animal in distress and they practically lose their minds. And it's a good quality in some ways. And it can be slightly impractical, because if you had to help the animal, you've got to be able to put your emotions aside. But she obviously is able to, even though she's weeping, she's still able to help the calf. And so it's interesting that there are instances in the Leela even for her to manifest compassion, because generally we would think compassion would be more directed toward the world, because we in the world are in need of compassion. In the Leela, everything's perfect. What need is there to show compassion? But as we see here, that there are times when it can come out, which is a great benefit of reading books like this, so that you can actually see that all these things are still there. And then another one, her cleverness in arts. So Radha, master of all arts of love, is an authority in painting with minerals. So she'll paint Krishna with gopi dots and other designs and whatnot. She is skillful at cooking a variety of pleasing dishes on her own. And on her own means, in Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary, he says, not learning from anyone, she produces a variety of cooked foods by her own creativity. That's pretty extraordinary. Because if you read in books like Govinda Lilamrita, the extensive preparations that she makes every morning for Krishna when she goes to Yashoda's kitchen and assists Rohini in cooking for Krishna and Balaram, her cooking is acknowledged by everyone in Braj as being the best, and yet no one taught her. So that is another way of saying that she's the fountainhead of all these arts. She makes Krishna foolish in word battles and is master of stringing garlands. She is skillful at understanding the shadi, the female parrot, and the parrot. She defeats Krishna at dice and has sharp intelligence in music. And there are examples of the sharp intelligence in music where I don't remember where I read it, but basically she schools Krishna from time to time. He plays his flute and then he makes some blunder, very subtle, I'm sure, and she corrects him as to, you could have done it better. Now, of course, she would only do so out of a desire to increase his pleasure. And that's if we don't remember anything about Radha other than one thing, it would be everything she does is for Krishna's pleasure. That's her entire reason for being, you could say. And so just even when she's scolding Krishna, or she's obstructing Krishna from touching her, or she's defeating him in a battle of words, and then the Sakis are laughing at him, that's all just to increase his pleasure. That all makes him very happy. So she does these things for him. Like the extreme selflessness it's difficult to fathom for us in conditions souls as we are, to think how selfless this person, this being is, to be that giving. And yet, we have the audacity to think we want to live with them. And then just kind of going through. Dhairya Shalini, her great tolerance. And this one struck me because, of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us the mandate in the third verse of Shikshastikam to be more tolerant than a tree. And then, now it's easy for us to understand the necessity for tolerance in the material world, because the nature of the world being what it is, there's a lot to tolerate, quite frankly. The world is not designed to be a place that is totally pleasurable. It's not how it is. And as anyone over the age of, say, 6 months has figured out. But in the Leela, well, it's like, well, what is there to tolerate in the Leela? It's blissful, it's beautiful, it's perfect. Well, we find out her great tolerance. So her angry husband, that would be Abhimanyu, his mind disturbed by Padma's false words, scolds her. Her necklace is stolen by a monkey under Kutila's instruction. Shaibya's favorite goat eats up the flowers of the jasmine plant pleasing to Krishna. Radha, most tolerant, sees all this and remains silent. So Padma and Shaibya both belong to Chandravali's camp. And so they, being her competitors, they find sneaky ways to try to undermine her. And she has to tolerate these things. So Padma has told Abhimanyu that your wife Radha is cheating on you, and that has disturbed his mind. And so now he's yelling at Radha about this, and she has to just take it. And then Kutila has a pet monkey who she instructed, when Radha is alone, you will go and make yourself scary. And then when she's distracted, go and steal her necklace, the necklace that Krishna gave her, and then bring that necklace to me. Or Shaibya. So Krishna, let's see, it's looking at the commentary. So she's got she's growing a jasmine plant that she had in mind naturally to probably make garlands for Krishna with, being the expert garland maker that she is. And so you can imagine, you've raised this jasmine creeper since it was a seedling or whatever, and with the intent of pleasing Krishna with it. And then one of your competitor's friends comes over, competitor's friend's pet goat comes over and eats that plant. How annoying that would be. And yet she says nothing. And of course, and in these qualities, you'll see that these are manifested in great devotees as well, to one degree or another, like this next one, Gambhirya Shalini, inscrutability. So the verse is, Sri Rupa says, though Radha is situated in the midst of conflict within her mind, she remains calm. Externally, she appears most respectful. By her intelligence, she has become indescribably gentle. So it's an example of being disturbed in one's mind, and yet externally, everything is just the same. And so Vishwanath comments that Rupa Manjari speaks to her friend So though there is a cause for agitation, she does not become disturbed. Since prema is nourished by agitation, it may arise internally from some cause and then manifest externally. Not taking revenge in this situation is called dhairya, or tolerance. However, when the inner agitation does not manifest externally at all, it is called gambhirya, or inscrutability. So gambhirya, obviously we know the term gambhira from the Gambhira in Puri, where Mahaprabhu spent the latter portion of his Leela. Gambhira means deep. So inscrutability is depth. So you've got, it's kind of like a pond with a clear surface, a flat, perfectly flat and smooth surface, and yet underneath there's all kinds of activity going on that doesn't show up on the surface. Gokula Prema Vasati. So she's, all of Gokul has prema for her. Radha has been made a mass of prema by the Creator. On seeing her, the minds of all the inhabitants of Gokul are filled with affection. And Jiva Goswami comments that this is spoken by Yashoda to a friend. So we find examples of this in, again, the Govinda Lilamrita, when Radha, requested by, or you could say, depending on which point of view you want to take it. So Yashoda asks that Radha, because her cooking is blessed, that she should come and cook for Krishna every morning. So Radha and a contingent of her Sakis and Manjaris will go to Nandagram every morning to cook for Krishna. And when they get there, Yashoda, her affection for Radha is as great as it is for Krishna. She will smell Radha's head and embrace her and facilitate her in every way so that she can do her service to Krishna. Very beautiful to see the interactions of the devotees amongst themselves in their service to Krishna at the center. I hadn't seen this before, and Vishwanath Chakravarti even gives the context here. Seeing Radha from far off, coming to her house to cook in the morning, Yashoda speaks to her friend. She's the object of great affection by the elders. So Yashoda, again, she speaks, "You are not the daughter of Kirtida. I say that you are my daughter. Seeing your face, I come to life as I do on seeing Krishna's face. Why are you ashamed?" So of course, Radha, going before Yashoda Rani, would have her face covered and head lowered in submission and whatnot. And Yashoda saying, "No, you're my daughter. You have nothing to be ashamed of before me." We can just imagine, from these descriptions, just how sweet of just the flow of Leela, how sweet that is on a daily basis. Just all these different emotions playing off one another and augmenting one's sthayi bhav, and all for Krishna's pleasure. There's so much going on there. And the books like this are there for us to meditate on and enter into all these things, at least to have some information as to what our goal is in a more concrete way. And it's very, very helpful for us to meditate on these things. Yes, Vishwanath Chakravarti comments on that verse. Yashoda speaks to Radha, who remains speechless, covering her face in shame before her. Yashoda says, my affection for you is not less by 1 degree than your mother's. I come to life on seeing your face. This is the main reason why she called Radha every morning. Interesting. So even though Krishna, Yashoda Ma wants Krishna to be healthy and strong by eating Radha's cooking, she also gains life from seeing the face of Radha, just as Krishna does. And her next quality is her dependence on her friend's affection. Radha, Vishwanath Chakravarti's comments, Radha, greatly disturbed, speaks, "O friend, teach the son of Nanda. Why does he afflict me, who am dependent on my friends? He should leave the houses of respectable women in fear. Does he know the heroic assaulting skills of Lalita?" So, of course, Radha is never alone, just as Krishna is never alone. She's surrounded by her friends, the Priyanarma Sakis, first of all, the Ashta Sakis, the principal 8, headed by Lalita and Vishaka. And of course, their maidservants, and all the various groups and whatnot, subgroups. And Jiva Goswami, I forget where, I think it might be in the Sandarbhas somewhere, he describes that the reason there are so many gopis is that so that rasa can be augmented, and rasa with relatively few people is less relishable. And so the more people involved in, the more vessels of rasa there are, the greater the overall rasa there will be. And so there are many, many vessels. And of course, the Sakis, the Priyanarma Sakis and whatnot, they are what is known as Kaya Vyuha, expansions of Radha's body, to increase the sweetness and the quality, the sweetness, and the quantity of the rasa. And then she is the Krishna Priyavali Mukhya. She's the principal woman of Krishna's affection from Lalita Madhava. So this is Krishna speaking. My dear girl with the fascinating eyes, even if I am attacked by many girls with beautiful eyebrows, who are expert archers with their restless, crooked glances, how can I find happiness for even a moment without you? I am like the sky. Even if the sky is embraced by moonlight and all the stars, it never becomes bright until it is filled with the morning sun. So, of course, this verse brings to mind the Rasa Leela, where Krishna, dancing with the 1 billion gopis who showed up, at one point decided to leave with Radha, the only one. So in the Rasa Mandala, there's circles and circles and circles of gopis expanding outward. And in the very center is Radha and Krishna standing there. And so if Radha had left, then despite the fact that all of those 1 billion gopis being there, he would not be satisfied. But with her alone, he can be satisfied. And then all of those other gopis, they just reflect and increase his love for her and hers for him. And then Santatashrava Keshava, it's the last of her qualities, her constant control of Krishna. So we know from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that bhakti it has the power to Sri Krishna Akarshani, to completely attract the all attractive. So here's an example of her doing that. Oh, Radhika, I have plucked a mass of flowers uncrushed by the bees and have brought many undamaged peacock feathers according to your words. Give up using the fresh leaves, brilliant as the rising sun, for making the garland. A person like me should act under your control. Give me another order. So this is Krishna speaking. So Radha has sent him out to collect flowers and peacock feathers for decoration. And of course, we know from the Bhagavatam, I forget the verse, of course, but where Krishna submits himself to Radha at Kurukshetra. And so he more or less admits in the Leela at different times. And it goes back and forth. It's kind of like, well, I like to think of it as the Taoist symbol of the yin and yang. So they're complementary halves of a complete whole, and they trend as one. Sometimes one will have the upper hand and control the other, and vice versa. And so it's not that Radha always controls Krishna or Krishna always controls Radha. It depends on the situation. Sometimes one controls the other. And then, so that's the end of the qualities. And then Sri Rupa, now he segues into, or actually doesn't even segue, he just starts talking about the different types of groups and the different types of sakis, which I was intending to get into that in the next installment. So, he says, the first part of before he starts actually getting into the types of sakis, he says, in Radha's group, which is the best of all, are beautiful women decorated with all good qualities who completely attract Krishna. So most of them being, of course, expansions of Radha, they're going to have qualities similar to hers, although less in quantity. And so she and all of the sakis in her group, although the principal sakis like Lalita, Vishaka, Tungavidya, et cetera, they have the ability or the qualification to be group leaders, but they choose to submit themselves and serve under Radha rather than be a competitor to her. So, of course, we know in different instances that Radha will push a certain gopi forward or to go with Krishna, even though she may not want to. That gopi may not want to. But Radha knows, in this particular instance, Krishna will be pleased with her. So we've heard that Sri Radha herself is supreme. Her group is the highest group. She is the one who satisfies Krishna the most. And of course, the opposition is there just to, as in any drama, you got to have a villain. So even in Sringar Rasa, this sweet rasa, all these sweet relationships, you got to have some opposition. So it's not just that there is opposition from the social pressures of being in a varnashram village setting where young girls and anybody other than their husbands are not even supposed to look at one another, what to speak of talk to each other, what to speak of, actually get involved romantically. Otherwise, the entire village's fame would be, the village would be defamed and the people would be considered low class and whatnot. So what to speak of that social pressure of the greater Varnashram context and the pressure of keeping their love affairs secret from the elder sector, from the elderly, from the Vatsalya sector, I should say, even within the Shringaras, there's still a villain, one could say, or still opposition in the form of Chandravali in her camp. And so there are all of these different elements that make it more difficult for Radha and Madhava to meet, make it ultimately more relishable when they do. And so as the separation, more powerful the separation is before the meeting, the more intense the meeting is. And so it's like, as Rupa Goswami poetically describes the movement of love like a snake. So it's back and forth. It moves in a crooked way. It's not straightforward. And if it was, then one can surmise that it would become rather dull and stale and boring over time. But this is one of the aspects of Krishna Lila, is that it's continually new. And so this love moves in these crooked ways, and that pleases Krishna very much. And so with that, I think that's pretty much all I had for today. I'm going to change the muting status. So if anybody has any comments or anything, then they can share them.
Haribo. Do you hear me, Citta?
Probably not in English.
He said he went in English. Oh, I'm not in English.
Oh.
Haribo?
Yeah, now I can hear you, sorry.
Oh, okay. So I was wondering, like, maybe you'll go into this more next time, but I've always been wondering this point about Vishaka and Lalita being able to be group leaders, but instead they are serving Radha. But we see that they have groups, and like they're kind of the leaders of the Manjaris. So what is this point saying?
Yeah, that so, and probably the next two, because there's three more discussions. So the next two, I think, will be discussing Radha's friends and type of love that they have, that Radha has, and that they have, the Samartha Rati. And so that would also get into that would answer your question at that time, where, what is, in fact, let me make a note of that, just so I remember to have my references in hand. So the groups, even though the gopis like Lalita and Vishaka, they are qualified, they prefer to submit themselves, but then they do have groups of their own. But those groups, they bring those groups in to serve, to augment their service to Radha, right? Not to augment their service they're not augmenting their service. They're not recruiting people into their own service of Krishna. They're recruiting people, and those groups all exist to assist Radha in her service to Krishna. I think that would be the difference. That's a short answer for now. Okay, great. Any other comments or questions? Okay, that's looking like a no. So look at that, right on time. Well, that's pretty good. Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in once again, getting little bits of the nectar coming down through our great acharyas like Sri Rupa Goswami. And so next time we'll be hearing about Radha's friends, and like I said, the type of love that they have. We'll go into some of the rasa tattvas surrounding the type of love that the different types of sakis and the type of love that Radha's sakis have and that she has. And of course, that'll get into a discussion of the window of opportunity for sadhakas that has been opened to us by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sampradaya and his followers. And that'll probably go on for the next two. Yeah, I would think so. The next two discussions. And then the last one will be getting into Leelas, where I was thinking to just share different selected Leelas from Govinda Lilamrita or something like that. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. And can't unmute. What? I thought I did that. That's called unmute.
Yeah. So I think you asked everyone to unmute instead of allowing everyone to unmute.
Oh, so
That's a different. But I guess in future episodes, you can just skip that thing about muting the people, like because like usually like it's only sometimes it's a problem if people are
right.
Unmuting by mistake and then you hear noise and stuff, but then you can just mute them.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Until next week. Hari Bol.
Shriman Citta Hari Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Jai Ho.
Bye.
Jai Radhe.